This fabled race is won by one of their own. Charles Leclerc wins the Monaco Grand Prix to achieve his dream.
Well, thank God that's over. Yes, after somehow surviving death by boredom last time out in Monaco, F1 was back. This time we were headed to Canada.
You got a problem with Canada Gooses? You got a problem with me? And I suggested that one marinate.
More specifically to Montreal, Quebec.
I loves fishing in Quebec.
Who doesn't love fishing in Quebec?
Great fishing in Quebec.
I fucking hate Quebec.
And the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, which is a hometown race for Lance Stroll, so hopefully the Canadian will show up and do well, maybe even get as high as the top 12. Coming into the weekend, and for the first time in quite honestly years, the Constructors' Championship was close, with Ferrari sat just 24 points behind Red Bull, a total of 276 to 252, so somebody should probably tell Checo that now's a good time to stop smashing up cars like they're piñatas. But would the Mexican's Canada go better than his Monaco? Well, let's find out as we get into my ultimate review of Formula 1 and the 2024 Canadian Grand Prix. So what had been going on? Well, following Sergio Perez's run of poor results, along with his mega crash in Monaco, there were consequences over at Red Bull.
When will you learn that your actions have consequences?
With the team deciding that based on his performances, he should get a contract extension.
What?
With the deal being for not just 1, but potentially 2 years.
How, in the name of all that's holy, did you do that?
Well, it's interesting, isn't
Is it?
To be fair, I'm not surprised Checo was extended, given what you can get away with at Red Bull. Elsewhere in the driver market, and there was more news, as Alpine announced that they would be parting ways with Esteban Ocon come the end of the season, with all this following team principal Bruno Famin's comments that there would be consequences for Ocon following his collision with teammate Gasly in Monaco.
When will you learn?
Pretty sure that the contract talks went down something like this.
You are fucking. You bloody.
Also, don't forget that just 2 years ago, Alpine had the potential driver lineup of Fernando Alonso and Oscar Piastri. Honestly, that team fumbles drivers like Arsenal do Premier Leagues. And then finally, to round things out, F1 released the overview of the new regulations coming into effect for 2026, meaning that once again, just as the field closes up and the racing gets close, the rules go and change. So into practice, and saying it was wet was an understatement. More like the track being a 5-kilometre long swimming pool. Actually, I probably shouldn't have said swimming pool. Don't really want to give George a reason to take his top off. But given the rain, everyone struggled, with one particular corner being the hairpin, where cars arrived at the turn and would go deep, again, and again, and again, and again. With Charles Leclerc electing to take his Ferrari-branded washing machine for a spin cycle to top it all off. And then when Charles wasn't busy being a Beyblade, he and his teammate were instead getting in everyone's way, with one near casualty of Carlos Sainz being Gary the Groundhog at the final chicane. Thankfully, no groundhogs were harmed in the making of this video. So far. Now in practice, we've covered swimming pools and drivers going off, so how about we combine the two? As the Turn 8 runoff was giving Shrek Swamp a run for its money, as Daniel Ricciardo found out, as did Max Verstappen in the same session, so presumably just chasing Daniel out of there.
What are you doing in my swamp?
With the Finn, Valtteri Bottas deciding to take it a step further than both of them, adding a little spin into the mix. However, that wasn't the end of Valtteri's practice though, as later on he had got himself noted for driving unnecessarily slowly. No, I think that's just the pace of the Sauber. Over at Alpine, and they had a new driver in for practice, as reserve Jack Doohan was in Esteban Ocon's seat for FP1, which apparently had nothing whatsoever to do with the fact that they were parting ways with Esteban.
Bullshit.
As it turned out though, it was all a bit of a waste given that Doohan was sent out for a grand total of 2 laps.
Wankers. Fucking embarrassing. Waste of our time. Fucking waste of our time.
But turning our attention now from wasted time to wasted car parts, and we look to Zhou Guanyu, who decided the best way to get to grips with the track was to lose his car and send it into the wall. But in fairness, for the first few laps it was quite wet, so I'm sure he'll do better in the dry. Yeah, kinda not, as a pretty slow and painful spin landed him in the wall early on in the final practice session, with Alex Albon in the Williams also electing to hit the wall later on, breaking the right rear of his car on the Wall of Champions, which obviously means that Alex is about to mount the greatest title charge we've ever seen. Into qualifying then, and with possible rain, everyone wanted to get out early, with the track conditions improving and giving us some pretty bizarre driver orders, such as Lance Stroll in P1, even if it was just for a little bit. There were also some less surprising things, such as Lewis Hamilton sitting in the drop zone, along with Sergio, so no surprises there. Now Hamilton got through, and that left Perez on his fresh tyres right at the end of the session.
Easy top 3. If I'm not 16th!
Yep, the very first qualifying after extending his contract, P16.
What are you?
An idiot sandwich.
Into Q2 then, and despite nearly binning it, George Russell was safely through. Same couldn't be said for Max Verstappen though, who until his very last run was sat in the drop zone, with that bottom 5 in Q2 apparently becoming the new home for Ferrari, as both Leclerc and Sainz were knocked out in 11th and 12th place. This team honestly can't let their fans have anything good for longer than a single race, can they? Talking of good things though, and in Q3 it was surprisingly Mercedes. Well, one Mercedes, as Lewis Hamilton forgot how to drive and slotted himself into P7. Whereas up at the front of the grid, we had 2 drivers on exactly the same time. One the Mercedes of George Russell, the other of Max Verstappen, with the Brit having set his lap time first and so got pole position with Max and the McLarens behind, along with Daniel Ricciardo up in an impressive P5. Can't think what might have inspired that performance. On to the race then, and all 20 snails went crawling away in the wet conditions, with Charles Leclerc taking an interesting line on the opening lap. By interesting, I mean completely straight lining the final chicane, given his Ferrari was seemingly allergic to the wet conditions. Meanwhile, Sergio Perez was demonstrating he was allergic to not crashing, as he tangled with Gasly at turn 2, with both of them sustaining some damage. All I'm going to say is, 2 years. Over at Haas though, and they had played an absolute blinder with one of their tyre gambles finally paying off, as starting on the wets versus everyone else on the intermediates vaulted both cars up the order, with Magnussen up to P4 and Hülkenberg up to P7. And so, when the track started to dry, all they had to do was switch over to the inters. Just nobody told the team, who kind of forgot to bring the tyres to the pit stop, and so Kevin's wet stint was all for nothing.
Oh, fuck. I can't believe you've done this.
Plus then in the other Haas, they just left him out there to melt his wet tyres into sludge. And so Haas finally pitted Hülkenberg, who given how much time he'd lost on his tyres, obviously came out in 19th. Who the hell was bad enough to be last after all of that? Oh, okay, that makes sense. Especially given that Logan spent his early laps learning how to reverse out of the barrier. At Ferrari, and if a bad qualifying on Saturday wasn't enough, an old friend was rearing its head on the Sunday, as Charles Leclerc was dealing with engine issues that were apparently costing him half a second.
Hey, I've seen this one. This is a classic.
At the front though, and it was Max Verstappen putting the pressure on George Russell for the lead. That was until he went deep at turn 1, cutting across the grass and putting himself just ahead of Norris. And on lap 20, it was time for a move, as into the final chicane, Lando used the now enabled DRS to get by Max and up into second place. Then one lap later, it was Norris on Russell, with Lando pulling off exactly the same move, but this time it was for the lead.
Man, the first time was so nice, I had to do it twice.
With George also having a controller disconnect moment after being passed, which allowed Max to get by for second, with Piastri catching for 4th and Alonso holding up Hamilton away back in 5th. But you know what would close up all of those gaps? A safety car. Oh hello Logan Sargent, stranded on the track. I mean, who else was it going to be? As Logan lost the rear over the curbs at turn 4, which sent him into the barrier and then for an early shower, with the following safety car bringing most people in and it shuffling things around, with Lando Norris losing out with the safety car timing, dropping him from 1st down to 3rd, with Hamilton and Mercedes jumping Alonso in the pits to get into 5th, and Leclerc down in 19th, with Ferrari throwing one last Hail Mary to reset the engine and fit some dry tyres. At which point it instantly started raining, and so yeah. I mean, at least they had Sainz doing well. Never mind. So surely that was all the pain for Ferrari, right? Still no, as Sainz then lost some front wing and Leclerc stopped again to put the intermediates on. Look Ferrari fans, all I'm going to say is, you had your fun last race. Elsewhere at the restart, and Alex Albon was submitting his entry for overtake of the race, threading the needle to get by both Ricciardo and Ocon in a single corner and put himself into 9th. Fast forward then a few laps more, and with the sun now shining, it was time for slicks, with Hamilton and Piastri pulling the trigger from 4th and 5th just a little too early, then Russell and Verstappen coming in after a couple of laps but Lando Norris staying out, with the McLaren exiting the pits a couple laps later just ahead of Max, but with Verstappen taking the lead. And with tyres still getting up to temperature, Lando was vulnerable to George behind, and then soon enough he was passed by the Mercedes with the DRS down into the final chicane, with George now having the chance to chase down Max Verstappen for the win, provided he didn't make any silly mistakes. Well, he did just a lap later, hopping the curb, allowing Lando to get by and into second. So, 18 laps to go now, and the front three looking like... Wait, Sergio, why does your car look like that? Well, as it turned out, he'd lost the car all on his own, spun off into the runoff, and smashed his rear wing on the barrier.
You've done it again!
Where is the card?
I'm honestly convinced that Sergio is doing all of this on purpose at this point. But getting back to the race, and as it turns out, crashes are just like buses. Two come along at once. As Carlos Sainz, just like Perez, spun round but drifted across the track, collecting Alex Albon at the same time. Which is already embarrassing enough, before you add in the most pathetic wet grass donuts and attempted U-turn I think I've ever seen, legit half expecting to see one hand up in the air like a rodeo. This of course brought out the safety car, which bunched everyone back up again, and with Russell dropping to 4th with a pit stop. But with fresh tyres, George was attacking Oscar to try and get up on the podium. However, as it turns out, trying to physically force two cars side by side at the chicane isn't the way you do it, as that actually just cost Russell a position to Hamilton behind, which then put Lewis in position to attack Piastri's McLaren, which he did, getting the DRS and getting fully by before the braking zone to put his Mercedes into 3rd place, with teammate George then making the same move a lap later to make it a Mercedes 3-4. So, 3 laps to go. Are we finished with the drama? Not quite yet, as Yuki Tsunoda did his best to destroy his car, narrowly avoiding the barrier at turn 9, and in the battle of the Mercedes, George was squeezing up the inside of Hamilton to put himself on the podium, with Lando Norris still up ahead in P2 and Max Verstappen up in P1. But anyways, that's all for now. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed. Please make sure to give the video a thumbs up if you do. It really helps the video out, and get yourself subscribed for all the content this year. But until next time, take care.